I never planned on being a butcher. It started with needing a job after my divorce, and a buddy of mine, Gary, hooked me up with a position at a local meat shop just outside of town. Old school place, he told me. You'll like it. Quiet work, decent pay, no one breathing down your neck. That part was true. But there's a reason no one stayed there longer than a year. From day one, there was something off about the back room. Not the cutting floor where we broke down the carcasses. That was fine, bloody but predictable. The back room was something else entirely. It had no official purpose. No shelves, no equipment. Just a single hook hanging from the ceiling and a small drain in the center of the concrete floor. Gary told me it was for overflow when things got busy, but I never saw it used. There was a camera installed in the corner, one of those old black dome models, but Gary said it hadn't worked in years. Even so, I caught myself glancing up at it whenever I stepped inside, like some part of me didn't believe it was really dead. There was a weird humming sound in there, too. Faint, but constant, like a refrigerator motor buried behind the wall. The first time I noticed the stains on the floor was maybe a week in. Dark patches that wouldn't scrub out no matter how much bleach I used. They were in strange shapes, not puddles or splatter, more like outlines. The kind you'd get if someone had laid down for a very long time. Or several someones. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my business. But it got harder to ignore when I started having dreams. In them, I was always in the back room, lying on that cold concrete. Sometimes I'd hear someone breathing just outside the door. Other times I'd hear a knife being sharpened slowly, over and over, without ever seeing who held it. The worst dream was the one where I looked up and saw myself standing over me, holding the cleaver. I told Gary about that one. Jokingly, half expecting him to laugh. He didn't. He just went quiet and said, "Everyone gets that dream sooner or later." Then he walked off like it didn't bother him. 3 months in, the humming in the back room got louder. It was always strongest near the drain, like something mechanical was spinning just beneath the surface. I'd kneel down and listen sometimes. Dumb, I know. But it wasn't just humming anymore. There was movement. A vibration you could feel in your knees if you stayed there long enough. And sometimes I thought I heard a wet slapping sound, like something trying to climb upward. I stopped going in unless I had to. But one day, Gary called in sick, and I had to close the shop alone. I was doing the final sweep when I noticed the back room light was on. I was sure I'd turned it off earlier. When I went to check, the door was slightly ajar. Inside, the drain cover was missing. Just a black hole now, and the humming was deafening. I crouched and stared down for maybe 10 seconds before I heard the sound, a long, rattling breath. Like someone exhaling after holding it in for a long time. That's when I saw it, fingers. Pale, wet, and human, curling around the edge of the drain. I didn't wait to see what they belonged to. I ran. I didn't even lock up. I drove home with my apron still on, the smell of blood soaking into the steering wheel. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the walls, every distant car engine felt like something dragging itself out of a hole. I didn't quit. I should have. But Gary came back the next day like nothing happened, and I didn't know how to say what I'd seen without sounding insane. "Long night?" he asked. I just nodded. The shop was quiet for a while after that. The humming returned to its usual low buzz. I stayed away from the drain. But the dreams kept coming. Only now, I wasn't lying on the floor anymore. I was standing over someone else. Someone smaller. And I wasn't holding the cleaver. I was using it. That dream always ended the same way, with blood pooling around my boots, and a knock on the back door. 2 weeks later, I noticed a new guy shadowing Gary. Young, wiry. Nervous in the way I'd been when I started. I asked Gary if we were hiring someone else, and he said, "Just breaking him in case you leave." His tone made it clear that wasn't a suggestion, it was a plan. I started watching the security monitor more. Most of the cameras were standard, grainy feeds showing meat cases and storage units. But camera 9 was still labeled back room. even though Gary swore it had never worked. One day, just to test the theory, I stayed after hours and stared at that dead feed. And then, just for a split second, it flickered. There was someone standing beneath the hook. Tall. Unmoving. Watching the ceiling like they were listening to something just out of reach. I blinked, and the feed was gone again. The next day, I confronted Gary. Not directly. Just a nudge. "You ever think that room gives people dreams?" I asked. He didn't respond. Didn't look at me either. He just said, "Everyone's gotta feed it once." That was the first time he used the word feed. That night, I brought a crowbar to work. I waited until Gary left, then pried the drain open. I shouldn't have. The hole wasn't just a pipe, it went deeper. Too deep. I dropped a flashlight down and counted 6 seconds before it hit something soft. And then it was gone. Swallowed. When I leaned closer, I heard it again. That breath. Only this time, it wasn't alone. There were voices. Low and distant. One of them was mine. The next day, the new kid didn't show up. Gary didn't say a word. Just wiped down the counter with slow, even strokes. "Sometimes they leave," he said. "Sometimes they stay." I went home early. But that night, when I turned on the TV, the security feed was playing on every channel. Static overlay, black and white. Just the back room. Just the hook. And beneath it, a shape. Small. Wrapped in butcher paper. I screamed. No sound came out. I unplugged the TV. Nothing changed. The last thing I remember before blacking out was that same rattling breath, right behind me. When I woke up, I was on the shop floor. In my apron. Cleaver in hand. Blood under my nails. Gary was smiling from the other side of the counter. "Told you it gets easier. I don't sleep anymore. I just wait for the knock on the back door. Because I know it's coming. And this time, it's my turn to feed it." When I first started at Hutchins Meats, the shop was already in decline. Mr. Hutchins, the owner, had suffered a stroke a few months earlier and hadn't spoken since. His son, Clay, handled most of the business now. Clay wasn't much for words either. "Clock in, cut clean, keep quiet," he told me on my first day. At first, I thought it was just his way of staying efficient. But I learned fast that silence wasn't a policy, it was a rule. The shop sat at the edge of a dying town, surrounded by hills and trees thick enough to feel like a border. We didn't get much traffic. Most customers came in once a week, cash only, and never stayed long. The layout was simple: front counter, walk-in freezer, cutting floor, and a door at the back with no handle on our side. Clay told me never to speak above a whisper. "Even if it's just you in here," he said. "No raised voices. Not ever." I asked why once. He looked over his shoulder before answering. "Sound carries. Especially the wrong kind." I laughed. He didn't. Weeks passed. I got good with the blade. Found rhythm in the repetition. Even the smell, raw fat, blood, sawdust, faded into background noise. What didn't fade were the noises from the handleless door. It started on a Tuesday. I was trimming fat from a pork loin when I heard something heavy slide across the floor behind the door. I froze, cleaver mid-swing. It happened again. Slow, deliberate dragging. I told Clay. He didn't look up from his ledger. "It heard you." That's all he said. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I heard that same dragging noise. Not just in my head, outside my apartment. In the hallway. Right up to the door. Then nothing. The next morning, I showed up early to ask Clay more. He was already there, staring at the back door like it had just spoken. He didn't notice me at first. When he did, he simply said, "You need to understand something. That room? It's older than this shop. Older than me. We didn't build it. It was already here." I wanted to laugh, call him superstitious. But the look in his eyes made my throat tighten. He looked exhausted. Hollow. He leaned closer. It doesn't like to be noticed. Doesn't want to be described. That day, we worked in complete silence. Not even whispers. And still, the dragging sound came back. Louder, angrier. Like something pacing behind the door, furious to be ignored. Later, as I was mopping, Clay handed me an envelope. If it speaks to you, you don't answer. Understand? I opened the envelope. Inside was a Polaroid photo. It showed a man, someone I'd never seen, mouth open mid-scream. His head was twisted at an impossible angle, but what chilled me was the setting, the cutting floor. Our shop. Same white tile. Same hooks. I asked who he was. Clay didn't answer. That night, I dreamt I was lying on the cutting table. Not restrained. Just waiting. The lights buzzed overhead. The smell of bleach and iron filled my nose. Then something whispered my name from the back room. Only it wasn't a whisper, it was inside my ear. Like breath but colder. Hungrier. I woke up with blood on my fingertips. Not mine. The next morning, the photo was gone. So was Clay. All that remained was the key to the back room. Sitting on my cutting board, I stared at the key for a long time. It was small, blackened with age, with a tag tied around it that simply read, "Only once." I didn't open the door. Not then. Instead, I waited. For Clay. For the noise. For something. The shop was dead silent all day. No dragging, no whispers, no customers either. The silence felt staged, like the pause before someone screams. At closing time, I locked the front door and turned off the lights. But I didn't go home. Instead, I sat on the cutting table, the key in my hand, staring at the back room. I told myself I was just going to listen. Maybe knock once and run. But at 1:43 a.m., the doorknob turned on its own. Just a small twitch. Like a spasm. My breath stopped. My heart didn't beat, it punched. I left without locking up. That night, the dream came back. Only this time I wasn't on the table. I was behind the door, looking out through the peephole that didn't exist. I saw myself. Pale, eyes wide. The dream me whispered something. I woke up before I could hear what it was. The next morning, Clay was still gone. No message. No call. Just the key, and the sound of something pacing behind the door again. That day, a woman came in, middle-aged, dark circles under her eyes like bruises. She placed her order without meeting my gaze. Before leaving, she slid a note across the counter. It read, "He fed it. You must seal it." No name. No explanation. By then, I'd stopped trying to explain anything to myself. I waited until dusk, locked the doors, and stood in front of the back room with the key between my fingers. The key turned easily. The door opened slower, like it didn't want to move. Inside was darkness. No walls. No ceiling. Just a cold that hit me in the teeth. And a smell, old wood, copper, wet earth. The light from the shop stopped at the threshold. I stepped forward. The first thing I noticed was the floor. It wasn't tile anymore. It was stone. Like a basement no one had entered in a century. I took 5 steps, each one echoing back with a delay that made no sense. And then I heard it. A voice. Not spoken, remembered. It sounded like my own voice in a memory I never had. Cut quiet. Feed clean. Don't speak. Shapes emerged in the dark. Hooks without chains. Knives without handles. And in the center, a slab. Clay was there. Or what was left of him. Just bone and skin, eyes still open. There was no blood. Just deep incisions, surgical. Clean. Too clean. The door behind me shut. I didn't turn around. I just whispered, "What do you want?" The air shifted. A weight pressed down on me. And then, nothing. No response. No sound. I backed out slowly, dragging my feet like any sudden motion might provoke it. When I reached the door, it opened on its own. I stepped back into the shop and closed it behind me. The key snapped in my hand. Shattered. That was a year ago. The door hasn't moved since. But sometimes, around 1:43 a.m., I hear it breathing again. I still run the shop. People still come in. And sometimes, I see Clay's eyes in the faces of strangers. I haven't had another dream. Not yet. But every night, I tape my mouth shut before bed. Just in case I talk in my sleep. I got the job because of my hands. Not my strength or precision, but the way my hands didn't shake. That's the most important thing, the butcher told me, pointing a finger that looked more like bone than skin. If your hands don't tremble, the meat won't remember. I laughed. He didn't. The shop was called Vale's. One of those places hidden between warehouses and train tracks, where customers don't come to browse, they come to pick up pre-ordered cuts, wrapped and bagged and waiting. I was the only new hire in a decade, and the only one who wasn't family. Mr. Vale was a silent kind of man. Spoke only when he had to, and never about anything personal. The one thing he drilled into me was to never cut into a bone. Bones aren't meant to be broken. You slice around them. Always. Even the marrow is to be left intact. But we sell marrow bones, I said once. He looked up from sharpening his blade, eyes like cold milk. Those come from somewhere else. The other butchers didn't speak much. 4 of them. All older than me. All moved like they were one body, slow, exact, quiet. None of them had names, or at least they never shared them. They nodded when I walked in, handed me cuts, but never really saw me. Except for the night I made a mistake. It was late. We were behind on a shipment, and Mr. Vale had gone home. I was slicing a shank, distracted, tired, and the cleaver went too far, straight through the bone. There was a sound I can't describe. Not a crack. Not a snap. More like something releasing. Like a breath held too long. And then the marrow oozed out, not white but a pale red, with something like threads inside. The other butchers stopped what they were doing. All 4 turned to look at me. Not angry. Not surprised. Just alert. One of them walked over and took the cut from my hands. He didn't say a word. Just held it up to the light, nodded once, and placed it in a separate bin. Not trash. Not storage. Just separate. They didn't speak to me for the rest of the night. That was when the bleeding started. Not on the table. On me. Small spots on my forearms, like pores leaking blood. No cuts. No pain. Just tiny pinpricks that wept all through the drive home. I scrubbed and bandaged. The next day, they were gone. But the smell lingered. Bone. Wet bone. That week, I wasn't assigned any new cuts. Just clean-up duty. The drains, the floors, the disposal bins. I figured it was punishment. Then I noticed what was in the bins. Not meat. Not scraps. Teeth. Small ones? Human. Baby teeth. I asked Mr. Vale. He didn't answer. Just looked at me for a long time, then finally said, "Some cuts go deeper than others." I wanted to leave. I almost did. But the shop felt like it had wrapped around me, the way cold does when you stand too still. I couldn't imagine what came after. All I knew was the rhythm of the blade, the pulse of the bone, the silence of marrow. Then came the noise. One night, after closing, I heard knocking from inside the walk-in freezer. Not banging. Not fists. Knocking. 3 soft, polite taps. The knocking didn't stop. 3 taps. Then silence. Then again, exactly 30 seconds apart. Rhythmic. Measured. Like someone was waiting for me to respond. I stood outside the walk-in, holding the mop like it was going to protect me. The temperature gauge glowed green. Everything was normal. Except nothing felt normal. I backed away. Didn't check inside. Locked the front and left without finishing my shift. That night, I dreamed of a hallway made of rib cages. The bones curved overhead, forming a tunnel, and at the end of it was the cutting table from the shop. Something was lying on it, wrapped in brown paper, bleeding through. I walked closer, and the paper twitched. Like breathing. I woke up with blood in my mouth. Not mine. It tasted old. Like pennies and rot. I called in sick. For 2 days, I didn't step foot near the shop. No one from work called. Not even Mr. Vale. On the 3rd morning, I found a package on my doorstep, wrapped in butcher paper, sealed with twine. No return address. Inside was a bone. A femur, I think. Clean. Cut at perfect angles, like it had been removed for display. In the center, where the marrow should have been, there was a rolled slip of paper. I pulled it out with tweezers. It said, "Come back. You're inside already." That night, I started bleeding again. This time from my nose and ears. I didn't go to the hospital. Somehow, I knew they couldn't help. I went back. Vales looked the same. Silent. Dimly lit. But the cutting floor was empty. No other butchers. No sound. Except the freezer. The knocking had stopped. I walked up to the door. It wasn't locked. I pulled it open. Inside was warm. There was no frost, no meat hooks, no shelves. Just a corridor, narrow and dark, walls lined with shelves filled with bones. Every few feet, a candle burned low. I stepped inside, and the door closed behind me. I don't remember walking. But at some point, I reached the end of the corridor. A room, lit by overhead lights like the shop's cutting floor. In the center was the same table from my dream. And on it, something wrapped in brown paper. I stepped closer. There was no blood this time. No twitching. Just stillness. I reached out and peeled the paper back. It was me. Not dead. Not asleep. Just unfinished. Parts of my face were soft, like clay. My ribs were exposed, but there was no pain. Just an overwhelming sense of wrongness. Like I was seeing a lie I'd almost believed. Then I heard Mr. Vale. He stepped from the shadows, older than before, paler. His hands looked even thinner. "You cut too deep," he said. "The marrow knew." I tried to speak. Nothing came out. "You're not the first," he continued. "You won't be the last. But it chose you." He raised his hand, and I saw what he held. A cleaver. Not stained. Not old. New. Like it had just been forged. "Marrow remembers," he whispered. "Now you will, too." He stepped closer. I don't remember the pain. I woke up in my apartment. My hands were bandaged. My apron was clean. The shop was gone. I drove there, and the lot was empty. Just gravel and weeds. But the dreams haven't stopped. Every night, I walk that hallway of bone. Every night, the table is closer. And in the silence before I wake, I always hear it. 3 soft knocks. Waiting to be let in. I didn't ask about the freezer when I got hired. You don't ask too many questions when the job pays under the table and comes with no paperwork. "We don't use it anymore," was all the owner said. "Just keep the door locked." It was the walking unit behind the back hallway. Big enough for a dozen full carcasses, easy. Padlocked from the outside with a rusted chain. The steel door looked warped, like something heavy had slammed it from the inside. The rest of the shop was a mess, greasy floors, flickering lights, an exhaust fan that never shut up. But the pay was better than warehouse work, and nobody seemed to care what you did outside of work hours. For a guy like me, that was gold. The first month passed without anything strange. I learned the usual cuts. Chuck, brisket, loin. Started remembering customers' names, their weird little preferences. No ribs with the fat trimmed, no blood in the bag, cuts wrapped double even if they were being used that day. I figured people just got picky when meat was involved. Then I noticed the smell. Not all the time. Just every few days. A sharp, metallic sourness, like bad pork left too long in the sun. It came from the back hallway. Right where the freezer sat. I told the owner. He looked at me, face blank, and said, "Some things rot slow." That was the first time I noticed he never walked past the freezer himself. Send me instead, always. Even if it was just to get a mop. The dreams started soon after. Always the same, me standing in front of the freezer door, hearing a steady thump from inside. Not frantic. Not panicked. Just waiting. Measured. Like a heartbeat pressed against steel. In the dream, I never opened the door. I'd just stand there, listening, until something behind me whispered, "He's still in there." Then I'd wake up. One morning, the padlock was gone. The chain, too. I asked the owner. He just grunted. "Didn't like being tied up," he said. Then he turned back to gutting a pig. I checked the door. Still shut. But there was a dent now, fresh. At shoulder height, like someone had slammed it from the inside. I told myself it was just temperature warping the metal. That night, I stayed late to clean. Around 2 a.m., the fan cut off for the first time since I started. Total silence. Then came the sound. Not knocking. Breathing. Right on the other side of the freezer door. Slow. Deep. Like someone waking up after a long sleep. I backed away. Left everything as it was. Didn't even clock out. Next shift, I avoided the back hallway entirely. But the freezer had moved. Not far. Just by an inch. But enough that it left scrape marks on the floor. Steel on tile. I showed the other guy on shift with me, Mike. He laughed it off. Earth settles. Or maybe it's just hungry. I laughed too. But later he handed me something. A folded note. Yellowed. Grease-stained. It said, "Never let the door open. Not again." On the back, in different handwriting, someone had scrawled, "He remembers the cold." That night, I had the dream again. Only this time, the door was open. The door swung open in the dream with a sound I'll never forget, like leather tearing under pressure. And inside wasn't frost or meat hooks or the smell of ammonia. It was a room. A narrow, bare room with concrete walls and a man sitting in the middle of the floor, legs folded, arms crossed over his knees. His skin was darkened with freezer burn, cracked like old paint. But his eyes were open. And looking straight at me. He didn't speak. He just raised one finger to his lips and smiled. I woke up screaming. That morning, I told the owner I needed to quit. He didn't argue. Just nodded like he'd been expecting it. "We all try to leave," he said. "Let me know if it follows you." I didn't ask what he meant. I just left. But that night, I couldn't sleep. There was condensation on my bedroom window, even though it was warm outside. I wiped it away, and for a split second, I saw something move behind me in the reflection. Not in the room, just the reflection. A figure standing in the corner, face obscured, breathing loud enough to fog glass. I didn't turn around. Just stared into the window until the shade vanished. A week passed. I found work at a deli across town. Normal hours. Normal customers. No walk-in freezers. But the smell followed me, metallic and wet. Some nights I'd come home and find meat juice on my shoes, even though I hadn't handled raw cuts in days. Then came the knocking. Not loud. Just 3 gentle raps on the bathroom door, always when I was inside. Always when the mirror was steamed over. I lived alone. I tried burning sage. I tried sleeping with the lights on. I tried white noise machines to drown out the breathing I now heard through the vents. Nothing worked. One night I got a package. No label. Just a plain cardboard box on my front step. Inside, a frozen cleaver, wrapped in butcher paper. Taped to the handle was a note. "Return what you opened." I stared at the cleaver for hours. It never thawed. Even in my hand, it stayed cold, ice cold, painful to touch after just a few seconds. At midnight, I made a choice. I drove back to the shop. The building was dark, boarded up. A for lease sign hung crooked in the window. But the back door was open. Inside, it smelled like bone. The freezer door was shut again, but this time, it was breathing. Not metaphorically. It expanded and contracted like lungs under pressure. I approached slowly, cleaver in hand. The closer I got, the colder the air became. Not a normal cold. This was the kind that hurt in your teeth and made your eyes water. I stood there, waiting. I didn't plan what to do. Then I heard him. From the other side of the steel. You cut the chain. Now cut the sound. I raised the cleaver. The door didn't resist. Inside, the man was standing now. Same cracked skin, same black eyes. He didn't move toward me. He just smiled and pointed to the ceiling. I looked up. Hooks. Dozens of them, swaying gently. Empty. Waiting. I dropped the cleaver and stepped back. He didn't follow. But as I closed the door, I heard him whisper. The freezer's not a place. It's a memory. And now you have it. The door sealed with a hiss. I left the cleaver behind. I never went back. But sometimes, on cold nights, I smell that rot again. And I find frost on my mirror. Even when it's not winter. I started cutting meat when I was 16. It wasn't a job I wanted. My uncle owned a butcher shop and offered me weekend shifts after my mom got sick. Honest work, he said. Puts hair on your chest. What it really put was a pit in my stomach. Something about the place felt wrong. It wasn't the blood. I could handle that. It was the sound. Meat makes noise when you cut it. Everyone knows that. But at my uncle's shop, it sounded different. Softer. Like the cuts reacted. I told myself I was imagining things, just nerves. Until I heard it sigh. It was a pork shoulder. Big, fresh, pink. I was breaking it down when I leaned in close and heard it. A low exhale, like breath from lungs no longer there. I dropped the knife. Looked around. No one else reacted. I told my uncle. He smiled. Means you're doing it right. That was his only explanation. The longer I worked, the more it happened. Groans in the walk-in. Shivering cuts of beef. Chicken breasts that twitched when I touched them. Every time, I looked to the others for reassurance. Nothing. Just dead eyes and fast hands. After a month, I started losing time. I'd blink and an hour would vanish. I'd look down and find cuts arranged in shapes I didn't remember making. Circles, spirals, grids. One time, a name. My name. I tried quitting. Told my uncle I couldn't do it anymore. He just looked at me and said, "You don't leave once the meat knows your hands." I laughed, like it was a joke. But he didn't. That night, I dreamed I was inside the walk-in freezer. Naked. Cold. Surrounded by hooks, but none of them touched me. I stood perfectly still as a light flickered overhead. And then I saw them, figures, skinless, eyeless, watching from the corners. One of them stepped forward and placed a hand on my chest. "You're almost ready," it said. I woke up screaming. My hands were wet. Not sweat. Blood. There were cuts on my fingertips, thin, surgical, like someone had flayed just the surface. They didn't hurt. But they didn't stop bleeding either. I wore gloves the next shift. My uncle didn't comment. No one did. It was like they couldn't see what was happening to me. Then came the whispers. Not at home. At the shop. Whenever I opened the fridge, the meat would murmur. Not in words, just sounds. Urgent. Wet. Pleading. One day, I cut into a flank steak and found something inside it. Not bone. A tooth. Human. Root intact. Lodged deep, as if the muscle had grown around it. I dropped the steak and backed away. My uncle came over, picked it up, looked at the tooth. "First one's always the worst," he said. "After that, it gets easier." I asked what he meant. He didn't answer. Just patted my back and walked away. That night, the dreams returned. This time I was the one holding the knife. The skinless figures watched silently as I carved into something that looked like a person but didn't fight back. When I looked down, the thing on the table had my face. I woke up with my mouth full of blood. My tongue was swollen. Sliced. Like I'd been chewing something too tender. I didn't go in the next day. Called in sick. My uncle didn't press. Just said, "Rest up. You'll need your strength." That sentence stuck with me. I didn't like how he said, "need." Like there was something waiting. Something physical. That afternoon, I cleaned out my room. Packed a bag. No plan, just the primal need to get away. But when I went to leave, the front door wouldn't open. Not stuck, locked. From the outside. I lived alone. Every window was sealed tight. No latches, no gaps. I checked my phone. No signal. No Wi-Fi. Just static on every screen and a blinking notification from my calendar. Cut today, 3 p.m. At 3:01, the bleeding started again. From my fingertips. Same as before. I wrapped them tight and tried to call for help. The phone only played one sound, wet chewing. The next day, my uncle showed up at the door. I hadn't called him. He let himself in with a key I never gave him. Didn't speak. Just placed a wrapped bundle on the table and said, "Practice." I didn't unwrap it. He left without another word. For hours I sat and stared at the package. It bled through the paper. Slow, like whatever was inside was still thinking about dying. Finally I snapped. I tore it open. It was meat. At least I told myself that. But the more I cut, the more I realized this wasn't pig, or beef, or lamb. The texture was wrong. Too warm. Too responsive. It tensed when I touched it. When I made the first slice, it moaned. I screamed. The meat shuddered. Then whispered. It said, "Thank you." I ran to the sink and tried to wash my hands, but the blood didn't come off. It wasn't staining my skin, it was inside it. Running backward. That night I didn't sleep. I tried. I lay in bed, eyes closed, but every time I drifted off, I jolt awake with the sensation of knives gliding along my ribs. Not painful. Just precise. Like something was measuring me from the inside out. At midnight I heard the shop bell. Not outside. Inside my apartment. The sound came from the hallway. I followed it. At the end of the hall was a door I didn't recognize. No handle. Just a single word etched into the wood, "tender." I touched it. It opened. Inside was the butcher shop. Empty. Cold. Clean. My station was lit. On the table was another wrapped package. No note. I stepped inside. The walls breathed. Not visibly, but I could feel the expansion and contraction, like the building itself had lungs. I walked to the table and unwrapped the package. It was my hand. Cleaned. Dressed. Positioned perfectly. But I could still feel it. I raised my arm and watched in horror as my real hand began to unspool at the wrist, skin separating, tendons tugging outward, like meat drawn into memory. Then I heard him. My uncle. "You're not carving meat," he said. "You're carving what's left." "Left of what?" I asked, my voice foreign in my throat. He smiled. "Whatever you used to be." I turned to run, but there was no exit. Just walls of butcher paper, stretching endlessly. The scent of salt, bleach, and old fear filled my lungs. I woke up back in bed. But my hand was gone. No wound. No pain. Just smooth skin where the limb should be. On my kitchen table, a wrapped package. Still warm. Still bleeding. Still breathing.